Here's Jeff Paterson, our Canucks reporter, one half of the Rink Wide duo with Andrew Wadden. How are we doing, Jeff? You enjoy that weekend of hockey?
Oh, yeah, it's overloaded. I mean, it's incredible. For me, the Winnipeg-Vegas game on Saturday, I think, is the high water mark of the weekend. But, boy, followed closely by last night, Edmonton and L.A., and then Toronto and obviously Tampa had a ton of theater involved there. That is nuts that the road team won all 8 games over the weekend. Like, that is just hard for me to wrap my head around that. But watched a lot, consumed a lot. And again, that's what you love about the opening round is just it's nonstop. Day like yesterday on Sunday from 10 in the morning our time until 10 o'clock at night.
And many, of course, with an eye on that Islanders-Carolina series. Bo Horvat getting on the wrong side of Canucks fans with that comment about the playoff drive at UBS Arena being superior to Vancouver. You tell me, Jeff, what do you think here? Are the Canucks the early winners of the Bo Horvat trade?
I think it's still way too soon to declare an early winner. The Islanders made the playoffs. Like, that was their stated goal. They were below the playoff bar at the time of the trade. They made the playoffs without Matt Barzal down the stretch. And I know a lot of people were happy to throw darts at Bo Horvat and his lack of production. But again, with Bo Horvat, it's not just goals and points. It's the minutes he plays, the matchups, the faceoffs, some of the things that allowed his team to play the way it wanted to ultimately get the points necessary. Look, I'm as surprised as anybody. Just the shooting bender that he was on as a Canuck, I thought, yeah, okay, there'll be a drop. But, he was so productive this season as a goal scorer for the Vancouver Canucks power play, but even at even strength. I thought some of that had to travel with him to New York. But, I was surprised at the regular season numbers. I thought, okay, we've seen him in the bubble. We've seen him produce in the playoffs that, this is why they got this player. And so for him to be as quiet as he has been, and yeah, he scored the shorthanded goal that made it 5-2 in a loss on home ice on Sunday. Not a lot of consolation there. And now they're facing elimination. So, for the Islanders to make the playoffs, I think that was important, and they did. But boy, it's been disappointing, obviously, from that point forward here if they go out in 5 relatively quiet hockey games. And for the Canucks, yes, they didn't commit to the contract, and I think a lot of people are looking at that, but they also didn't find the cap savings that people would have liked. That, you bring in Anthony Beauvillier, they basically were required to take a player that the Islanders have been shopping for much of this season, and then when you turn around and part with the assets to get Philip Hronek, Beauvillier and Hronek essentially are making what Bo Horvat is going to make for the next bunch of years. So, again, I don't think anybody here in Vancouver should be dunking on the Islanders. The Islanders made the playoffs. The Canucks didn't. It is going to be fascinating. I don't think that Bo is going to be able to live up to the contract he got, but good for him. Never going to begrudge a player that can get the money he gets from any team around the National Hockey League. And then from a Canuck perspective, there are still so many holes in this lineup. And one of the things you thought they might do was create some cap flexibility. They really didn't do that when you think of not just Beauvillier now, but also, what's Hronek going to command next year when he needs a new contract? And essentially his number won't come that far below. As a right shot defenseman, if he has any kind of decent season, his number is not going to be that far below what Bo Horvat's making on Long Island.
We pointed out some of his underlying numbers too, and it still points to Bo Horvat doing a lot of the good things, and it's perplexing, needless to say. I mean, you could make the argument though that there's a Canuck connection to the other part of that series as well, and that there was some rumors about Carolina's interest in perhaps a JT Miller and that sort of thing. With all of their injuries, my goodness, should they have been more active at the trade deadline to get some scoring insurance?
Yeah, probably. They do a lot of good things and a lot of things right in Carolina, but they ultimately work within their own budget too. Now, a little unfortunate. They took on Max Pacioretty and he got hurt, and that's been an issue with him, obviously, for much of his career. Svechnikov is a massive blow. I mean, that guy is just such a good player, especially at playoff time, such a big body that can create space and play in traffic and all those types of things. So, you don't bank on the Svechnikov injury, obviously, but yeah, I still wonder if, as they get deeper into the playoffs, I think part of their problem in years gone by has been a lack of a true game breaker. They've got a lot of really good players, a lot of nice pieces. They've got an incredible defense, but I do wonder if one of these years they're going to recognize that they're going to have to go all in. That's just the way that at some point they're going to have to make one of those deals that maybe doesn't sit well with themselves and ownership. But, if they want to put themselves over the top, I think that may be something that Carolina has to consider here in the years ahead.
What have you made of Luke Schenn's impact on that Leafs Lightning series?
Yeah, he certainly has got the attention of his former Tampa teammates, although I guess Tanner Jeannot wasn't a former Tampa teammate when Schenn was there. But, pretty funny scene there. And, at the bench after the melee and all of the jawing. And look, we kind of use the word the sheriff to describe Luke Schenn when he was here in Vancouver. I mean, that is part of what he is. He's a veteran guy that's still willing to play that role. I think embraces that role. He did it for Tampa. Now he's doing it for Toronto. And if you want to get after, some of those Leaf players, you're going to have to go through a Luke Schenn. And I think he was making that abundantly clear to Tampa. Now, didn't have Steven Stamkos and Austin Matthews in a scrap on my playoff bingo card. But again, that's the beauty, the unpredictability of playoff hockey. But ultimately, it's great to have toughness. And I still think the Vancouver Canucks, as they watch these playoffs, one of their takeaways has to be that they've just got to be a stouter team. They've got to be, bigger, stronger, add a little more heft through the lineup. But it also has to be able to play. You look at Michael Bunting, the biggest pest that the Leafs have, a guy that plays on the edge. And I think the Canucks could stand to have a few more guys that play a little bit on the edge. But Bunting crossed the line. He's been out of the series, and the Leafs haven't looked back. So, ultimately, what was the value of having a pest on that Toronto team, because he's not playing right now, and they're able to win hockey games. So, we said it a lot when Luke Schenn was here, just the ultimate teammate, guy that's going to stand up for himself and his teammates. He knows his role, and I think that's exactly why the Leafs went out and got him, and you're seeing that here a handful of games into round number one.
Don't we all wish we could buy Quinn Hughes a beer? Just give him a beer in the stands there. He doesn't have to go full Brady or Matthew Tkachuk as they're watching. But please get Quinn Hughes a beer, and let's see him enjoying himself a little more watching his brother Jack.
I think he's too depressed that he's not on the ice doing that
I
sort
think
of
that's
thing.
I think that's probably it.
But, I also hate this yearly. And whether you're in the playoffs and lose or out of the playoffs and trying to get in, the reevaluation of a team and being like, the Canucks need to do X now so that they look. I mean, you can do that till you're blue in the face, right? Because if you make the playoffs and you're out in 6 games, you're going to do that reevaluation anyway. Unless you're hoisting the cup, every team's going to think that they need to do X, Y, and Z.
It's funny, though. I watched the first 5 minutes of that Winnipeg-Vegas game on Saturday, and I was trying in my head to sort of drop the Canucks in and figure out, how would they measure up, stand up, and I'm not sure that they would. The first 5 minutes were intoxicating. It was the Kolasar hit on Lowry, the scrap with Dylan, bodies flying everywhere, and JT Miller plays playoff-style hockey most of the time. Dakota Joshua has a big body, led the Canuck forward group in hits. I think there's more to give there. I think Dakota Joshua would stand up, but after that, there is a massive drop-off in just the way the Vancouver Canucks are constructed, and I also wonder, Dakota Joshua has a big body. I don't think of him as an initiator, though, and I wonder who that guy would be on the Vancouver Canucks, or if they have that player right now, and how much does Rick Tocchet desire that? We know the way Tocchet liked to play the game. The game itself has changed since his playing days, but I still have to imagine that he sees the game through the same lens that he was as a player. And he always talks about the wall work and the board battles and those types of things. So, the Canucks have some bodies. Like Phil DiGiuseppe plays in the straight line north-south game but I don't think of him as a guy that's going out there and trying to run through opponents. And then you come to the next wave of, Brock Besser's got decent size, but he doesn't use that. He's not a physically opposing player. I think Elias Paterson has the competitive drive. I'm just not sure his body necessarily lends itself to, flying around and trying to hammer opponents, although we have seen him sort of pick up the physical side of his game as well. But then you go deeper in the lineup, a guy like Andrei Kuzmenko, I think he finished the year with 13 hits. How does he stand up to playoff hockey? And we don't know until they get there, but I do think it's a fair question to ask just the overarching theme of the Vancouver Canucks and the way that they are constructed. And then you get to the back end, and Quinn Hughes is incredible, but that he would be a target in the playoffs to dump the puck to his corner every opportunity and try and finish checks and wear him down. And then you look at what else they've got on the back end, and Ethan Bear is not a physical guy. If Jack Rathbone ever becomes a full-time NHLer, I don't see him as any sort of physical player. Christian Wolanin, when he was up, that's not the... So, I think that there certainly is room to build out this roster. With what money? Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, but I do think that there's work to be done here.
I think what's really hard, guys, is that for a moment in this league's evolution, the small players seem to have this skill and speed advantage on the big players. What we are seeing now is big players that play with speed and skill as well, and that's hard to compete with.
Yes.
When you've trot out McDavid, Draisaitl, and Kane, what are you supposed to do with that if you're the opposition? Like, what do you do with that? Those are massive bodies, tough to move. They play with enough grit, at least Draisaitl and Kane do. I mean, I just don't know how you trot out guys like Connor Garland in the playoffs if the Canucks are forced into that.
Well, and I thought it was fascinating just to use that as an example last night, Los Angeles, at home, last change, and our good friend Alex Edler played one shift out the final 16 minutes of the third period and then had a 22-second shift in overtime. And I just don't think the Kings felt that they could run the risk of having him on the ice with McDavid. And now they go on the road, and I wonder, does Edler play? He just turned 37 last week. Does he even get in the lineup? And if so, when you don't have last change, like how do you go about sheltering a guy like that where the Oilers would love to get the jump on a player like Alex Edler? And it's probably not fair to single out Edler because, look, we here in Vancouver, Oliver Ekman-Larsson is facing the same sorts of challenges as the game gets faster. But I think the answer, Blake, is now you need defensemen that, are so mobile, that can defend with their feet and body positioning. And it's, you try to win your battles in the corners, but some of those guys understand that you're not going to be able to compete with Leon Draisaitl physically, but you got to keep those feet moving so that you're not taking the penalties. And I do think that we're seeing an evolution in defending, and part of that is why now there are so many good young defenders in the league. I was watching Miro Heiskanen again yesterday. Like, I can't get enough of just watching that player. And I think a lot of the same things that we say here in Vancouver about Quinn Hughes, like, I don't know if Heiskanen will ever win a Norris. And that's not a knock on him. It's just that he's part of this golden age of so good young defensemen that all sort of play the game the same way. And he may never have the season that stands out above Cale Makar or Adam Fox or, Rasmus Dahlin or Owen Power or whoever. But he's just a hell of a defender and is going to be for a long, long time. And I'm sure the Dallas Stars are delighted to have him the way that the Vancouver Canucks are. But all of these guys, like, I think that we are seeing a change in the way, it's not looking for the big hit. It's just defending with your feet and making sure that you're always moving and trying to impede guys from getting to the front of the net.
A couple of things in follow-up. Number one, we actually paused my move Saturday because the Winnipeg-Vegas game was so good. And it was at my brother's suggestion, who's not the biggest hockey fan. He said, we got to stick around for overtime here. We're not actually going to go move boxes. No, we're going to watch the overtime. Secondly, Blake, remember 5 years ago they drafted Quinn Hughes? And we're like, this bias against small players in the NHL, especially with the game going towards more skill and more speed. A half decade later, guys, I think we're at the point where we may see a bias come back against the smaller player because the big guys can move.
They're so good.
Too.
They're just so good.
The
now.
big guys are the athletic evolution is taking hold, and you're seeing the big guys being able to move and play with the puck and have hands as well. And intoxicating is a great word, Jeff, because there have been a number of times here over the first week where I've sat down to watch, a period of the Stanley Cup playoffs here or there, knowing I have other things to do and just not being able to leave the television.
You can't leave. No.
Well, and last night I don't even have cable hooked up in my own. I'm listening to the Oilers.
You went old school
Kings game and absolutely enjoying every minute of it with Jack Michaels and our friend Bob Stauffer in Edmonton. Jeff, the Abbotsford Canucks are going to round 2 of the Calder Cup playoffs. We find out they're playing the Calgary Wranglers, who had a hell of a season in the AHL. Some good prospects, some good players on that Flames affiliate. What will you be watching? I mean, Alvin said a week ago, right? Some of this battle for roster spots starts in Abbotsford during the playoffs. What will you be watching in this Baby Canucks series?
Well, first and foremost, the fact that Calgary had the option and chose to have the first 2 games at home, and they're going to play in the Saddle Dome. They don't play all their games at the Saddle Dome, but playoff hockey, they're going to play, and obviously the Flames aren't using the Saddle Dome these days, so these guys get to play in the big boy rink. But I love the strategy here in the American Hockey League. Calgary was the best team in the regular season, finished with more points than anybody. So not just in the division or the conference, they were the top dogs in the American Hockey League. So Abbotsford's going to have its hands full. But the higher seed had the choice of 2 games to start at home or the back 3 games if the series goes the distance. And I love the strategy involved. They had one of the best home ice records as well. And so I guess they figure in a short series, if they can use home ice, get out to a 2-0 lead, you just apply all the pressure in the world on the other team. I have to think that is their thinking in this. But if you're Abbotsford, the old hockey cliche of getting on the road and trying to get the split, and then you come home and take your chances. And Abbotsford had a pretty good home record, and place will be jumping out there, I'm sure. So be interesting to see if this one pays off. I would imagine that travel and travel costs are one of the impetuses for the decision that has to be made, although Calgary to Abbotsford, obviously, pretty easy travel as it turns out. However, had Tucson beaten Coachella Valley yesterday, the Canucks would have ended up having to face Colorado in the next round and then travel a little more onerous, I suppose, in that regard. But from a Canucks perspective, the goaltending, to see Jeremy Colleton split and to go away from a guy that had a shutout in the opener and Spencer Martin and to go with Artur Silovs, there will be no shortage of goaltending in this series, guys. Dustin Wolf, the AHL MVP. So that's what the Canucks are up against. It's not just that the Flames have some talent out front. They've got arguably the best goaltender outside of the National Hockey League right now, and I'm sure the Flames farm team believes that he will be a difference maker in the series. Niels Höglander had an incredible 2 games against Bakersfield, 4 points in those 2 games and a couple of goals, so that's great to see. With management and talking in attendance, he has to know that, and so for him to step up and sort of take the reins and lead that group. Jack Rathbone, again, sort of at this crossroads, but he had a couple of goals. Goals from defensemen don't come easy for the Vancouver Canuck organization, so I like that from Rathbone, shooting the puck. I think he had 11 shots in the 2 games against Bakersfield. And I guess, finally, just based on the schedule, and it's certainly not a balanced schedule in the American Hockey League, the Abbotsford Canucks and Calgary Wranglers played 12 times in the regular season. So this isn't about needing scouting reports, I don't think. I think these 2 teams are pretty damn familiar with each other. And, if there's already a cooked-in hate on between the two, and there should be, just based on the fact that it's the Canucks and the Flames organizations, then, I think this all sets up to be a pretty spirited second round, and we'll see if the Canucks can pull off the upset. And that's what it's going to be, going up against the top team in the American Hockey League. But it's kind of funny, this season has come full circle. They just knocked off the Oilers farm team. Now they're playing the Farms. This is like Young Stars, but with stakes, right?
It's amazing you mentioned that, Jeff, because I started looking at the Calgary roster. I was like, Dustin Wolf and Jacob Pelche. I remember those 2 guys from Young Stars when we were all in attendance there at Neighborhood Watch at the South Okanagan
Guys,
Events
honestly,
Center.
if that series was televised, I think it would do a pretty decent number between these 2 markets.
You would
2
think.
non-playoff markets right now, big markets. I bet you it would do a decent number.
Mm-hmm.
There's enough curiosity there. By the way, shots on goal in that clinching game, Rathbone had 6 shots on goal. Danila Klimovic had 6 shots on goal, and he's denied in the end. Do you think the backup goaltender position has got some gravitas to this playoff run for Abbotsford? Do you think they're analyzing how these guys do in the playoffs here and using that as an education for the backup role?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, who gets the game 1 start? They both won. Spencer Martin hasn't given up a goal in the playoffs yet. We talk about Dustin Wolf being the league MVP. Artur Silovs was Abbotsford's MVP, and for him to have to take a back seat on opening night, that had to be tough. And Colleton talked about how difficult it was, a tough decision, that he knows that neither guy's probably thrilled with the situation, and yet it's what's best for the hockey club. And so if you got 2 guys that can deliver, maybe you throw a bit of a curve. If you lose the opener, then probably pretty easy decision to come back with the other guy and just throw a curve at the Calgary Wranglers. So, from a big league perspective, yes, no doubt that they're analyzing and watching closely. And I wonder if, for the longest time, I thought there's no way that Spencer Martin can come back and be the backup next year. But we heard Patrick Alvin say a week ago he's not going to spend on a backup. Martin is under contract. You don't generally see guys on, NHL tickets spending the entire season down in the minors. I wonder if there are some parallels to what happened with Thatcher Demko and his development, though, where they got Thatcher Demko a game. The first time he ever played in the NHL, it was an afternoon game. They brought him up from Utica. He played, and that was it for that season. Then he went back. He started the next year in Utica, played a ton, and if you remember, halfway through, Anders Nilsson was kind of spinning his wheels, wasn't doing a whole lot as the backup, wasn't winning many games, and they essentially moved off Nilsson and opened a path for Thatcher Demko. I wonder if there's a way that Spencer Martin starts the season here next year as the backup, and he's the backup till Christmas, and maximum of 8 starts or something, and you hope that he can get a few wins there. Meanwhile, Artur Silovs gets the first half of the season in Abbotsford to play every night and be the guy and continue his development. And if that plan pans out, maybe by Christmas time, you do a swap and Silovs becomes the backup here and gets some games. And at that point, you've got half a year left on Spencer Martin's contract, and it's a little more manageable and digestible. And you're giving Abbotsford a guy that has proven he can compete and play well at the AHL level. The issue obviously was being the full-time guy in the NHL didn't go so well for him. But I do wonder if that would be a path for Artur Silovs to get a half season more in the American Hockey League on a nightly basis and then be ready to make the jump somewhere around the midway mark.
Yeah, I mean, Alvina said effectively he's watching this Abbotsford series with an eye towards that backup tender and the crease next here. 4-5-2-1. I had to double check myself, Jeff, the record. They really played 12 teams this year. Yes, in fact, they did with that ungaggly.
And Calgary had a bye in the opening round, so they haven't played since a 3-game set against Abbotsford, and Abby beat them 2-3 at the end of the season there. So something to leave Calgary with, and Calgary's been practicing. But we've seen in other leagues, that's not easy to sit on the sidelines and then hit the ground running against a team coming off a playoff win.
Marvelous stuff, Jeff. If any kind of big news breaks with the Canucks, we'll talk to you later this week. If not, have a great one, and we'll catch up next week.
All right, guys. Thanks.